All right, everybody. Nurse Penny here. Good morning. I hope you're all doing well. When you get here, leave a comment in the chat so I know who's here. I like to know who I'm talking to. There we go. Sorry, just making sure we're good everywhere. And on, always a good thing. Bad to get halfway through your podcast and realize you you don't have one of your groups on. Never good. Uh, Stop that. And okay. There we go. That should stop the echo. Okay. I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to get here. And we've got such a fun time coming up. My daughter and her family are coming in from Ohio for the Memorial Day holiday, which is great because where she lives, 5 hours away, we don't get to see her all that much and see the grandkids and everybody. And so we're really excited. They're coming in. We're going to kind of do the birthdays that we've missed because they've, not been in town. So we're very excited about that. And then I'm going to have the kids, all four of them. So Cole is, I never get this right. Cole is 10. Or Nora is 8 or going to be 8. Isn't that terrible that I can't remember? I have to keep all the birthdays in my head because nobody else can remember them. And apparently I'm doing a pretty sketchy job. But and then I've got Atlas who will be 5 and Sophie just turned 4. So that'll be interesting, huh? Actually, they're generally really good for me. And kids I find as long as you keep them busy, they do fine. But my son's going to have like a friends party after the kind of family party. And so I'm going to take the kids so that he can enjoy his friends and his wife and, the rest of the family. Fix our camera there a little bit. All right. Well, hopefully you're here. I'm not seeing anybody in the chat. Let's see if we've got anybody watching yet. Oh, yeah, we got all kinds of people watching. Hey, guys, throw up a comment in the Rumble Rant section. Say hello. So I wanted to give everybody an update on my arm, and I'm hoping that the save screen in the video for the podcast this morning wasn't too confusing, because the screen says 10:30 on Tuesday, but the podcast is 10 o'clock today. So I'm guessing we may get some stragglers that come in because I've confused everyone terribly. But I had to go to the orthopedist yesterday. As most of you know, I think, that I had shoulder surgery March 14th, I think. See, I told you I'm bad with dates. What is with this? Do you see this? I clipped it back and you just have to, come on, ladies. You know how it is. Salty Zero, good morning. I work night shift, so I'm going to set bed soon. Just wanted to say hello. Well, I'm happy to have you here for as long as you can stay. I went to the orthopedist yesterday. I went to the new guy, the shoulder specialist, and told him, I'm just not doing well after my surgery. In fact, my shoulder's worse. And they took some x-rays, and the x-rays didn't show any kind of bone infection, which we were really, really thankful for. And did the exam and everything. And he said, I've got this kind of swelling on my shoulder here. And when they did the ultrasound, they said there was no inflammation. Of course, this was the other doctor. When the other doctor did the ultrasound, he also said I had 2 rotator cuff tears. But then when they got in there, he said I didn't have them. And then when they ultrasounded me again, they said they didn't have them and I didn't have any swelling. And I'm like, but I have an obvious lump on my shoulder. No, there's no swelling. So they checked labs to see if my labs would show swelling. They can check a SED rate and a CRP, and both of those were normal. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess it's not swelling. Then what the heck is wrong with my shoulder? Because it worked great for the first week after surgery. I went home, didn't really take any pain medicine, was just really tolerating everything well. And it's that side. See, I'm backwards on one screen. So I was doing really well, and then I just kind of fell off and couldn't do anything. And I'm one of those people that, will go too far. And so I had asked him, I said, I asked my old doctor, do you think I'm just pushing too hard? So we stopped therapy for a month. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I think we need to be doing something. So I was kind of doing range of motion stuff. And anyway, just not getting progressively worse. And so I went yesterday, and he said, oh, there's definitely swelling. Let's start you on a steroid, and we'll see you back in 6 weeks and, get you back to doing therapy aggressively. and then we'll see you back in 6 weeks. And if it's not any better, there's a test they can do that's a CT scan, and they use dye, but I'm allergic to the dye. So he's going to try to figure out if there's something they could use to see if there's tears in the rotator cuffs, because there were no pictures. During the surgery, the first doctor took pictures of the AC joint, which he had to clean out because it was really arthritic and had bone spurs, and took pictures of where he trimmed off part of my collarbone because it was catching or something like that. So anyway, he didn't do anything where we could actually visualize the rotator cuffs. So we'll see. Hopefully, if it's rotator cuffs, we can build the surrounding muscles in the shoulder girdle, and that will support them while they heal. And I won't need another surgery, which would be just awesome. Good morning, Coffin. And I really like this doctor. I feel much more at ease about the shoulder and about, proceeding with therapy and doing so aggressively. And he started me on steroids. Oh my gosh, you guys. I took, how when you get a steroid dose pack, if you've never taken one, if you get it in the middle of the day, you go ahead and take the morning and the afternoon dose that you missed right then. Within an hour, I could, look at this, raise my hand over my head. I mean, it hurts, but it's not bad. Can't quite cross my body yet. And it snaps when I'm doing it. But like touching my mouth, my ear, those still hurt, but I can do it. So that was huge. And I fell asleep on the couch yesterday, and I never nap because of what happened like 2 shows ago when I napped. It was just a mess. But I took a nap and I fell asleep on my left side, which I have not done since August of 2022 when I hurt my arm, and slept like a dead person until thunder crashed like a car coming through the house. I don't know that I've ever heard thunder that loud, and I've been in tornadoes. I came up off that couch like somebody had lit my butt on fire. The cats took off. We were trying not to collide with each other because everybody just scattered. It was crazy. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was sleeping on my left side. I know it seems like a really small thing, but I'm super excited. So we'll see how it goes. The last time I took steroids, I had the same reaction. And then once I was off them a week or two, I was right back where I started. So we're going to try to make the most of therapy while we've got the pain under control and see where we, how much we can gain. But that's all I've got. Of course, there's been new news stuff. We'll cover that on Friday. That's not what this morning is for. So we're covering Johnathan Cahn's The Return of the Gods. If you don't have it, don't sweat it, because I read it. Hey, that's like a don't have it, don't sweat it, I read it. I need a t-shirt. Book club. Write that down, somebody. Send it to me. Oh, glasses. Thought I cleaned them. Debbie, nice to reconnect, Penny. So glad your arm is on the mend. Oh gosh, me too. And nice to see you again. Yeah, I was looking to see. Yeah, it's Facebook. I thought so. All right. Oh, look, I can see. It's amazing. All right, here we go. We're starting on chapter 18. The Enchantress Returns. If you've missed, something is on my eye. If you've missed everything up until now, don't sweat it. You can just go back and watch the 2 before it, and I don't think you'll be too lost. So don't worry about it. All right, chapter 18. The Enchantress Returns. How did the second principality enter into America and the West? To find the answer, we must look back at how she gained entrance into ancient Israel. Mrs. Baal. It was early on, soon after the Israelites settled in the land, that they began turning to other gods. The first record of its turning is found in the book of Judges. The passage speaks first of the Israelites' embrace of the Baalim or Baals. Then it says this: they forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. From the very beginning, the 2 gods, Baal and Ashtoreth or Ishtar, were linked together. The connection reappears later on in the book of Judges. Then the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths. It appears as well in the book of 1 Samuel when the people realized the consequences of their apostasy. Then they cried out to the Lord and said, "We have sinned because we have forsaken the Lord and served the Baals and Ashtoreths." The Baal-Ashtoreth connection. Why are the 2 joined together? The fact that they could be portrayed in their mythologies as married or as lovers would account for some of it. But the connection between the 2 gods is deeper and one that transcends mythology. So too is the order in which their names appear. It is Baal who is first, and then Ashtoreth. Israel first turned to Baal and then to Ashtoreth. Baal leads to Ashtoreth. Baal represented the nations turning away from God and to the physical, the material, the carnal, and the sensual. It was this that opened the door for the entrance of Ashtoreth or Ishtar, and with it unbridled sexuality, licentiousness, and decadence. The worship of Baal had elements of all these things, but Ashtoreth was their incarnation. The one God ushered in the other, and the one spirit the next. The god of the apostasy ushered in the goddess of sexual licentiousness and debauchery. Ishtar comes to America. What would this mean for America and the West? If America's turning from God began to manifest in the early 1960s, and with it the entrance of Baal, we would then expect this to be followed by the entrance of Ashtoreth or Ishtar. And what would then happen in the wake of that entrance? We would expect a transformation to begin that would alter the realm of sexuality. With the goddess's entrance, we would expect biblical standards and ethics surrounding sexuality and marriage to begin to erode. We would expect the moral foundations and values that had undergirded Western civilization for nearly 2,000 years to begin overturning. In short, we would expect there to be a revolution in the realm of sexuality, a sexual revolution. Ishtar and sexual revolution. And that is exactly what took place. Shortly after America's turning from God began manifesting in the early 60s, another transformation took place in the realm of sexuality. It would be one of the central defining movements of the 1960s, and it would continue long after the decade was over. It would not stop until it had transformed American and Western culture beyond recognition. The effect of the goddess's return to America could be summed up in 3 words: the sexual revolution. There had been another sexual revolution. It took place in ancient times in the Greco-Roman world. It was the revolution by which biblical sexual ethics, ideals, and morality replaced those of the pagan world. It happened at the same time the gods were cast out of Western civilization. The two phenomena were connected. The casting out of the gods included the casting out of the Roman Venus, the Greek Aphrodite, the Phoenician Astarte, and the Mesopotamian Ishtar, all the varied manifestations of the goddess of sexuality. It was in the goddess's departure that biblical values replaced pagan ones, and the first sexual revolution took place. But if the goddess should return, it would mean that pagan sexual values would now overturn biblical ones. In other words, the sexual revolution that took place in America and Western civilization in the late 20th century was the reversing of the sexual revolution that took place in ancient times. It was the advent of the gospel that broke the goddess's spell. But now, upon her return, the spell would be cast again on America, the West, and the world. The spell of the sorceress. The sexual revolution was another dimension of the paganization of America and Western civilization. The values it represented were pagan values, and the sexuality was pagan sexuality. What was branded as the new morality was in actuality an old morality, an ancient morality, the morality of the gods. The reappearance of that morality was a sign that the departed spirits had returned to the house. The aim of the goddess was to destroy the morality and faith by which she was expelled. To do that, she would have to take a Christian nation and civilization that, with regard to sexuality and marriage, upheld biblical morality and practices and lead it into embracing pagan morality and practices. To do that, as with the return of Baal, she would have to work incrementally, step by step, and progressively. But it was the spirit of Ishtar, and to Ishtar especially belonging the powers of seduction and spells. So in recasting her ancient spell, she would begin the seduction of America and the modern world. What would it mean if America were to come under the spell of an ancient goddess? I'm guessing it's not going to be good. Chapter 19, The Great Seduction. What exactly would happen if the spirit of the goddess took possession of a culture? What would happen if it took possession of America? and then came Ishtar. In the American and Western culture of the mid-20th century, sexuality was seen as the sacred domain of marriage, and marriage as the sacred and lifelong covenant of love between husband and wife. These values were largely the same as they had been in ancient times at the advent of Christianity. Sex outside of marriage, whether premarital or extramarital, was seen as sin. Divorce was frowned upon. If a woman became oh, the times we live in, right? If a woman became pregnant before marriage, she and the child's father were expected to marry. The divorce rate was minuscule, so was the percentage of people living together outside of marriage, as was the rate of children born out of wedlock. Prostitution existed, but it was illegal and confined to the underworld. Pornography was taboo too, and for the most part kept out of mainstream culture and public view. Even those who broke such standards would, for the most part, keep their behavior private. American entertainment and popular culture were expected to uphold the same values. Beyond illusion and suggestion, sexual relations were generally not depicted on the movie screen. Hollywood was expected to follow an agreed-upon code of morality as to what could and could not be shown, and it did. Nudity of any kind was forbidden. Any allusion to sex outside of marriage was not to be portrayed in a positive light, and for television screens, the parameters were even higher. And then came Ishtar. The deification of sex. We have seen the dynamic of deification. When an individual, nation, or civilization turns away from God, that which is not God will become as God and will assume the aura of godhood. One of those things that are not God is sex. When Israel turned away from God, sex in the form of the goddess Ashtoreth or Ishtar was deified. She became a god. Sex thus became an end and a goal to be pursued in and of itself. Therefore, it could now be divorced from marriage or any other context and be followed with no regard for context or any other thing. When the spirit of Ishtar came to America, the same dynamics began to replay. Sexuality was deified. It became a god, to be pursued as an end and in and of itself, and without regard to marriage, love, or even a relationship. That which was once the exclusive domain of husband and wife now spilled into the public sphere and a popular culture. And so began the progressive severing of sexuality from marriage. As Israel worshipped and served the goddess of sexuality, so now America, indwelled by the same spirit and the same goddess, became increasingly obsessed with sex. The destruction of marriage. Though Ishtar was involved in the ritualized marriage ceremonies of Mesopotamian religion, and though some of her myths involved a form of marriage, there was almost nothing about her that was conducive to marriage, just the opposite. Her nature and her acts, her worship and cult would undermine it. She was never faithful. She was promiscuous. She pursued and seduced lover after lover. She pursued sexual relations apart from marriage and to the detriment of marriage. So the effect of Ishtar's return to the modern world was the progressive undermining and weakening of marriage. As sexuality was glorified as an end in and of itself, marriage was eroded. As Ishtar had pursued relationship after relationship, so America began doing the same. As the taboo against ending one's marriage began to end, so did marriages. Under the spirit of Ishtar, divorce became an epidemic, and America was filled with broken homes. Passions of the goddess. Ishtar was led only by her will and desires. She had no regard for the consequences of her actions. The idea of denying her desires for the sake of a covenant was to her an anathema. She sought the immediate fulfillment of every impulse. She was the goddess of instant gratification. So with the return of Ishtar, America and modern culture became consumed with instant gratification. Americans increasingly chose their desires over relationships, over preserving their marriages, or entering into them in the first place. A culture of hyper-individualism, self and self-gratification proved to be toxic to marriage and relationships. As it was Ishtar's nature to choose sexual pleasure and romance over commitment, more and more Americans did likewise. They slept with each other, lived with each other, but would not commit to each other. Marriage as a lifelong covenant was increasingly viewed as an unnecessary constraint. What was once fornication now became premarital relations, and in time, the norm. The number of Americans living together without marriage and the number of children born out of wedlock or without fathers would skyrocket. Ishtar in Hollywood. The realms of entertainment and popular culture were subject to the same spirit. The codes and standards that had been established to serve as moral hedges were now removed. What was once forbidden, abhorrent, or taboo now filled movie screens. And whereas the television industry once avoided showing married couples in bed, now it regularly portrayed unmarried people in bed and having sex with multiple partners. And whereas nudity was once never seen in public, it was now displayed on movie screens and piped into American living rooms. If Americans from the 1950s had turned on their television sets to see what would appear on the nation's television sets years into the future, they would not have been able to process it. It would have appeared to them as something out of the apocalypse or a dark fever dream. That was how radically effective the work of the goddess has been. The taboo. Ishtar's nature was to trespass boundaries, transgress convention, and break taboos. So American culture became possessed by a spirit of transgression, a drive to push the next boundary, to transgress the next convention, to break the next taboo. What was once abhorrent now became a source of pleasure. And it was not only the taking of pleasure in sin, but in the breaking of taboos and the overturning of the next standard. It was the pleasure of defilement and desecration. Not only did Ishtar introduce, promulgate, and champion sexual immorality, she sanctified it. She declared it holy. Sexual immoral acts were part of her cult and worship, performed as rites in her temples and shrines. So in the grip of her spirit, the same thing began manifesting in America and Western culture. Sexual immorality was now not only accepted, but treated as sacred. Sanctifying the forbidden. Now it was the former standards and restraints that were seen as sinful, puritanical, repressive, and evil. And the one who opposed the newly sanctified sins or failed to adequately revere them was now treated as something of a heretic, and the opposition to the new morality as something akin to blasphemy. What the spirit of Baal had begun, the spirit of Ashtoreth or Ishtar had taken to another level. The work of each god was to bring about the inversion of civilization. Ishtar had inverted the realm of sexuality. She had taken what was forbidden, unspoken, and taboo, and step by step introduced it into the mainstream culture. The shock of each step would be followed by familiarity and numbness, then toleration, then acceptance, and then celebration. At the end of the process, Americans would be championing what they had once forbidden and forbidding what they had once championed. Ishtar's realm was most critical. It was from sexuality that came marriage, family, society, civilization, and life. And so the workings of the goddess would produce the most profound of transformations in American, Western, and world civilization. She would alter them beyond recognition. She would alter life itself. Could that which now saturates the world of entertainment, drives major portions of the American economy, and floods the World Wide Web go back to a mystery contained in the tablets of ancient Mesopotamia? This is such a good read. I'm really enjoying this book. Let's see if I can hit my mouth with that straw. Chapter 20, The Sacred Prostitute. Ishtar was the patron goddess of prostitutes. She was their protector, their encourager, their supporter, their guide, and their matron. From the ladies of the night who walked the streets of Sumer to the sacred prostitutes who inhabited the shrines and temples of Babylonia, They all looked to Ishtar, prayed to her, worshipped her, and were her servants. Prostitution was a part of her cult. Sexual acts attended her worship and rituals and could be found in her sanctuaries. The temples of Ishtar were famous for their connection to prostitutes and even for the business of prostitution. The connection was intrinsic to the goddess's identity. The harlot goddess. Ishtar was not only the great benefactor of prostitutes, but their role model. Her obsession with sexuality, her promiscuity, her countless relationships and lovers, all of these served as examples for the ancient Middle Eastern prostitute. In the tablets of Sumer, Ishtar, or her earlier incarnation as Inanna, is described as a haremitu or karkid. The words are commonly translated as prostitute. Some argue that the words can mean prostitute, but not necessarily in every context. But the word appears in descriptions of Ishtar, where the context clearly refers to prostitution, specifically when it cites the tavern, the place where prostitutes gathered and worked. One ancient hymn says this: "They cannot compete with you, Inanna, Ishtar. As a prostitute, you go down to the tavern, and like a ghost who slips in through the window, you enter here." And from another, "You, my lady, dress like one of no repute in a single garment." As the ancient Mesopotamian prostitute could be identified by her jewelry, so too Ishtar. The pearls of a prostitute are placed around your neck. Another ancient tribute to the goddess is even more detailed, as it deals with the pricing of her trade. "When I stand against the wall, it is 1 shekel." Wow. Another ancient inscription has the goddess saying outright, "I am a prostitute." The sexualization of American culture. The return of Ishtar was the return of the prostitute goddess. It would set in motion a transformation based on the dynamics of her trade, as well as her cult of worship. Prostitution takes sexual relations out of the exclusive context of husband and wife and brings them into the larger culture, into the marketplace, the realm of trade and commerce. Likewise, Ishtar's cult of worship took sexuality out of the private realm of the marriage covenant and into the public realm of festivals, rituals, and temple worship. So when the spirit of Ishtar returned to Western civilization, it worked toward removing sexuality from the bounds of marriage. Sexuality now moved out of the private realm and into the public realm. What had once been the exclusive possession of husband and wife within the covenant of marriage now became the possession of the larger culture, popular culture, and public life. So American and Western culture became sexualized. Its sexuality had been stolen from the marriage bed. Sexuality was now everywhere and unbridled by the covenant of marriage. The harlot's pay. It was not only that Ishtar's prostitutes would take sexuality out of the marriage bed and into the streets of Sumer and Akkad. They would bring it into the marketplace. They converted it into a commodity to be bought and sold. In prostitution, sex was employed as a means of procuring money. So upon her return, not only did the prostitute goddess flood the culture with sexuality, but she increasingly employed it in the marketplace as a commodity. Sex would increasingly be used to procure money on movie screens, in music videos and magazines, on the internet, and wherever else it could generate money. What the spirit of Ishtar had promoted in the cities of Mesopotamia, it now promoted in America and world culture. Sex was monetized. The pornification of culture. It was not only that sex was used to sell other commodities, but, as in Ishtar's ancient craft, sex itself was up for sale. Industries that had existed in the shadows now entered the American and Western mainstream and were normalized. Adult magazines, adult clubs, adult movies, adult entertainment increased in numbers and influence. One no longer had to venture into the corners and shadows of American life. The shadows were overtaking America. The tablets of ancient Mesopotamia contain inscriptions in which the goddess seeks to tempt her lovers into sexual relations. They will not be quoted from here, as they could best be described as pornographic literature. So, as the spirit of the goddess increasingly took hold of American and Western cultures, pornographic literature and storylines began entering into the mainstream. As the ancient Mesopotamians read or listened to the pornographic words and stories of Ishtar, Americans now read pornographic literature, watched pornographic movies in theaters, on their television sets, and on their computer monitors. And as prostitution depersonalized sexuality, so the spirit of the prostitute goddess increasingly depersonalized sexuality. Mother of Eros. The newly mainstreamed sex industries would employ and be known by the word erotic literature, erotic dancers, erotic massages, erotic movies, erotica. The word erotic comes from the word eros. Eros was the ancient god of the Greeks. The name means desire. Eros was the god of sexual desire and love. Eros was born of Aphrodite. Aphrodite was the Greek incarnation of Ishtar. So behind the name given to describe the deluge that was sweeping over American and world culture was the pagan god Eros, and behind Eros was Ishtar. Behind it all was Ishtar. Having returned to the modern world, the goddess had again given birth to Eros. The images. The worship of Ishtar was not limited to pornographic literature or storylines. It found its most popular expression in imagery. The image of Ishtar as a naked woman could be found all over the ancient Middle East in terracotta reliefs, royal seals, and clay idols. Images of naked women were typical of pagan culture and especially prominent in the worship of Ishtar. Thus, we might expect that the entrance of Ishtar into America and modern culture would bring a revival of naked imagery. And that is exactly what took place. Naked images, particularly those of women, would again permeate Western civilization. In the modern case, it would be known as pornography. In ancient times, Ishtar caused images of naked women to spread throughout the Middle Eastern world in clay, stone, and paint. Now, upon her return, she began causing the same images to permeate the modern world in photographs, films, video clips, and digital imagery. The images and practices that once characterized the culture of the goddess now characterized American culture. The porn goddess. Among the oldest writings in world history are the sacred hymns to Ishtar Inanna, in which she is described as a prostitute. The Greek word for writing is graphos. The Greek word for Ishtar's profession, prostitution, is porn. It is from this word, writings about a prostitute, that we get the word pornography. Thus, by the literal definition of the word, pornography was birthed in the sacred writings of the goddess. And so, as the spirit of the prostitute goddess moved upon America, America became filled with pornography, or as it was called in short, porn, meaning in effect, the prostitute. American culture, entertainment, and American-produced internet made pornography ubiquitous. It was everywhere. Americans no longer had to go into the red light district of American cities and towns to obtain pornographic materials. American culture had now become a red light district. Ishtar had triumphed. Her effect on America was so great that it had now become the world's leading creator and exporter of pornography. America was now, in fact, producing the majority of the world's pornographic content. It had become the undisputed porn capital of the world. The civilization that had been consecrated at its inception to advancing the gospel and spreading the light of God to the nations was covering the earth with pornography and advancing the agenda of another spirit, that which now controlled it, that of the prostitute goddess. What do sex, drugs, and rock and roll, fortune tellers and witchcraft, intoxication, New Age movements, and the world of the occult have to do with one another? They all go back to the enchantments of a Mesopotamian goddess. The Intoxicator. As an enchantress, Ishtar tempted, allured, and captivated. She caused her followers to abandon reason and rationality to do what they otherwise would never have done. She cast spells, she worked magic. Thus, her ability to seduce was all the more potent. Ishtar's Potion. As the goddess who dwelled in taverns, Ishtar was strongly connected to the substances of intoxication served and partaken of there. In one of her myths, she schemes to take away the powers and blueprints of civilization contained in the tablets of the god Enki. She partakes with him of alcoholic beverages until he becomes intoxicated, at which point she takes off with the tablets. So to Ishtar belonged the powers of both seduction and intoxication. Thus it is of note that at the same time that the sexual revolution was taking hold of America, a parallel movement began, an explosion in the usage of intoxicating substances. After holding steady from the end of the Second World War, the rate of American alcohol consumption suddenly began rising. The escalation would continue for 2 decades and then would be followed by another escalation that would continue into the 21st century. The mind alterer. But it was another form of intoxication that so dramatically exploded in American and Western culture that it would in part define the 1960s, that of drugs. The phenomenon became so widespread that it gave birth to its own culture, the drug culture. Among the most celebrated of the newly embraced intoxicating substances were the psychedelic or mind-altering drugs that radically altered perception, thinking, and behavior. The state of intoxication and altered consciousness was now glorified as an ideal to be sought after. It was all in keeping with the goddess's nature. It was her power and will to alter consciousness, perception, and reality. With or without intoxicating substance, she was altering the American consciousness. Sex, drugs, rock, and Ishtar. For the ancient Mesopotamian, the taverns were inhabited by the spirit of Ishtar. It was there that those affected by her allurements were surrounded by 3 elements: sexuality, intoxicating substances, and music. When the spirit of Ishtar manifested in American culture in the 1960s, 2 of the 3 elements also manifested: sexuality and intoxicating substances. The third component would converge as well: music. Each of the 3 would epitomize the decade that began the transformation of American culture. In 1969, a Life magazine article identified the 3 elements as the counterculture's new sacraments: sex, drugs, and rock, or sexuality, intoxicating substances, and music, the 3 elements that characterized Ishtar's dwelling place. Medium of the gods. The Mesopotamians especially sought the power of Ishtar in performing magic and enchantments on those in their lives. She was the goddess of spells. Her powers were called upon to redirect or inflame a person's sexual desire or romantic affection. The spell could involve rituals, the use of objects, apples, pomegranates, the weaving together of cords into knots, symbolic acts that today would be called sympathetic magic or witchcraft. Ishtar was the goddess of mediums, those who were said to be possessed of the spirits. They spoke for the gods and revealed supernatural knowledge and counsel. Her spirit possessed them as it did her prophets. Ishtar herself was a medium, the mediator between the gods and mortals. Today, such mediums would also be known as fortune tellers, psychics, channelers, and practitioners of the occult. Indeed, all these elements associated with the goddess would today be categorized under the heading of the occult. She was the occult goddess. The occult revival. Thus, we might expect that with the return of Ishtar to the modern world, there would be a revival in the occult. And that, again, is exactly what happened. It was no accident that the same decade that witnessed America's turning from God, the beginning of the sexual revolution, the overturning of gender, the weakening of family, and the wide dissemination of mind-altering substances, also witnessed a massive revival in the occult. The spiritual void left in God's absence drew millions into a dark spirituality, and as with the other movements launched by the gods, occult beliefs and practices moved from the fringes and shadows of society to its mainstream. Witches and goddesses. Out of the occult revival came an explosion in the practice of witchcraft, as well as in the number of women identifying as witches. In this, they were taking on the attributes of the goddess. The occult revival would also give birth to the revival of pagan worship, neo-pagan movements, and hybrid movements that merged the occult with Eastern religions and ancient paganism. It would also produce movements, organizations, and religions dedicated to Satan worship. There was one other movement of special note that would also spring up from the seeds planted in the late 20th century occult revival: goddess worship. It was an outgrowth of the neo-pagan movements born of that revival. It included the worship of mother goddesses, nature goddesses, warrior goddesses, and great goddesses, among others. Often included in the pantheon of goddesses to be venerated or worshipped was the goddess in her varied incarnations of Astarte, Aphrodite, Venus, Inanna, and of course, Ishtar. The Grand Enchantment. The revival of goddess worship was also an outgrowth of the feminist revival that happened simultaneously to the occult revival. Both were linked to Ishtar. Now the two converge, but it was all converging. The sexual revolution with feminism, feminism with the occult with intoxicating substances with music, and music with the sexual revolution. In the goddess, they were all joined together. They were all joined together as well in that they were part of the paganization of America and the repaganization of Western civilization. As we have seen, the new morality was a revival of pagan morality. The occult and New Age beliefs were a revival of pagan rituals and religious practices, and the sexual revolution was a reviving of pagan sexuality. The gods were succeeding in transforming a Christian civilization into a pagan one. Transformation was Ishtar's specialty. She could enchant and seduce a nation, intoxicate it, alter its perceptions, and thus change its ways, entrance it, and possess it. What began taking hold of American and Western civilization in the 1960s would continue unfolding, developing, and advancing long after the decade had come to an end. Well, the pages are not working. But there was still one more player in the Dark Trinity. It could be argued that this was the darkest of the three. It is to that spirit and mystery that we go now, the third of the Dark Trinity, that of the Destroyer. Part 6, the Destroyer. Let me get a drink here. We're on chapter 22, if you're reading along. He was the most mysterious of the Dark Trinity. There is to this day debate over who exactly he was. His identity belonged to the shadows, but the evil he represented could not be more stark or brazen. He was Molech, the abomination god. His name makes several appearances in Scripture. When King Solomon fell away from God, he built high places, altars, and sanctuaries for the foreign gods. One of them was Molech. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. So horrifying was the nature of the god and his worship that he is called the abomination. The earliest of scriptural mentions warns of the evil associated with that name. And you shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire to Molech. When the righteous King Josiah endeavored to lead his nation back to God, he knew he had to destroy the altars of Molech. And he defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or his daughter pass through the fire of Molech. Molech was associated with the darkest of sins, the sacrifice of human beings, and in particular, the sacrifice of children. Even darker, Molech is associated with the sacrifice of children by their parents. The Bible speaks of the act as the most grievous of abominations, as well as the sign of a nation that has turned entirely against the ways of God and become lost to him. The God and the sacrifice. The name Molech can be translated as king. A number of modern scholars have theorized that the word Molech should rather be translated as a verb, denoting the act of child sacrifice itself rather than a god. But verses such as Leviticus 20, verse 5, which reads in the original Hebrew as Liznot Ahare HaMolech, or who prostitute themselves with the Molech, and others would argue against that. And to every sacrifice there is a God. So there would still remain a God to whom the children's sacrifices spoken of in Scripture were offered. Some theorize that Molech was another form of Baal, since he too is spoken of as receiving children as sacrifices. But even if there was anything to any of those theories, the act and practice of sacrificing children is of a demonic realm, so uniquely of its own category and nature that the name Molech stands uniquely on its own. The horror of the name. Beyond that, we must keep in mind the nature of the beast. The relationship between gods and spirits is symbiotic. The mythologies and beliefs of men may follow after the principalities and spirits, and the principalities and spirits may follow after the mythologies and beliefs of men. In that sense, the argument becomes immaterial. Molech is the spirit and god of child sacrifice. It is the principality of bloodlust, of cold, inhuman, and horrid destruction. In his epic poem, Paradise Lost, John Milton writes of the ancient god. First Molech, horrid king, besmeared with blood, of human sacrifice and parents' tears, though for the noise of drums and timbrels loud, their children's cries unheard, that passed through fire to his grim idol. In the 20th century, Winston Churchill used the figure of Molech to speak of the evil of Adolf Hitler. He had conjured up the fearful idol of an all-devouring Moloch, of which he was the priest and incarnation. The name of the ancient god has retained its horror down through the ages. His molten hands. Do we have any idea what the worship of Moloch was like? The Bible cites Israel's ancient neighbors, the Canaanites, as those who participated in child sacrifice. The ancient Greek and Roman historians bear witness to the biblical testimony as they record the practices of two Canaanite people in particular, the Phoenicians and those of their African colony, Carthage. The ancient Greek historian Diodorus Siculus records this of the Carthaginians. There was in their city a bronze image of Cronus, extending its hands, palms up, and sloping toward the ground so that each of the children, when placed thereon, rolled down and fell into a sort of gaping pit filled with fire. Cronus was the Greek version of the Roman Saturn, the god who devoured his own children. His name is used either because the Carthaginians had now associated him with Moloch or Baal, or because this was how Diodorus had made sense of what was taking place. The darkest depths. Child sacrifice was part of the rites and worship of the pagan peoples and cultures that surrounded the Israelites. So when the Israelites turned away from God, they turned to the ways of the gods. They began offering up their children. The prophet Jeremiah would confront the depths of their fall from God and the gruesome sin they were now partaking in and celebrating. And they built the high places of Baal, which are in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to cause their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire to Molech. It was the deepest and darkest of depths of their fall from God. But what if such practices were much more common than we would imagine? What if it was the prohibition of such practices, rather than the practices themselves, that was the exception to the rule? What part do the gods and the spirits have in such practices? And what if those gods, or one god in particular, was to come back? Chapter 23, The Abominable Sacrifice. How could anything so gruesome as child sacrifice, so morally abhorrent, and so obviously contrary to all that undergirds human existence, be embraced and practiced by any people or nation? The most pagan of acts. In the case of the pagan world, it was the result of God's absence. In the case of Israel, it was the result of turning from God's presence. And yet, contrary to what we might expect, the practice was not unique or exceptional. Rather, it was nearly universal. It could be found in the temples of ancient Egypt to the shrines of Tahiti, from the altars of Mesopotamia to the hanging trees of Germany, from India to Hawaii, from West Africa to Tibet, from the Aztecs to the Celts, from the Druids to the Mongolians, and among countless other peoples in countless other lands. Human and child sacrifice were symptomatic of pagan culture, thought, and values, and the overall devaluation and degradation of life. Beyond sacrifice, the young were especially vulnerable in pagan culture to mistreatment, abuse, and murder. Infants with deformities or disabilities were commonly discarded by their parents, left in garbage dumps, drowned in rivers, exposed to the elements, or abandoned to wild animals. The disposal life. Even children born perfectly healthy could be murdered if for some reason they were not found desirable or wanted by their parents. And even some of the most revered philosophers and esteemed leaders of the ancient world could endorse or decree the death of an innocent child. It was not safe to be a child in the ancient pagan world. One could be murdered at the moment of one's birth or before or after. It was not at all uncommon for children to be killed in their mother's wombs. With the pagan devaluation of human life came a bent toward death, the spirit of Moloch. Therefore, when a nation or civilization turns away from God, we can expect the same values and horrors to be revived. It is no accident that the same nation that turned from Christian faith and replaced biblical values with pagan ones, Nazi Germany, came to view the sickly and weak as contemptible and disposable, then set out to exterminate them. So too, when the Soviet government purged biblical values from Russia, human life likewise became disposable. In each case, the departure from biblical values to pagan or neo-pagan values resulted in the murder of millions. When I was made in secret. The biblical view of life, children, and the weak could not have been more different than that of the pagan world. From the very opening chapters of the Bible, it was established that human life was created in the image of God. Thus, every human life, whether young or old, male or female, strong or weak. Hold on. Let me make sure my computer's plugged in. I got to find the cord. All right. Where are you, you little bugger? Down. Oh, it's not. It's a good thing I looked up when the light dimmed. We'd have been in trouble. I'd have been reading just to me, which I do pretty frequently, but did you hear that battery hit? Oh my gosh. Thud. I'm sorry if you were trying to sleep to my reading. I totally messed that up for you. I actually do have people who tell me that they fall asleep when I'm reading and they have to go back and listen. But I'm glad it soothes you and you can rest. I always kind of feel that way about if I'm praying and I fall asleep. I'm like, well, we're better, right? Oh, for the love of Pete. Okay, let's try this again. I never know which way my ears go. There we go. Okay. You guys are so patient. Okay. Um, in each case, the departure from biblical values to pagan or neo-pagan values resulted in the murder of millions. When I was made in secret. The biblical view of life, children, and the weak could not have been more different than that of the pagan world. From the very opening chapters of the Bible, it was established that human life was created in the image of God. Thus, every human life, whether young or old, male or female, strong or weak, rich or poor, healthy or infirm, was of infinite value. The idea of slaughtering one's children on the altars of the gods was forbidden, abhorrent, and an abomination. The Lord was said to have carried Israel as a man carries his son. Children were now to be viewed as a gift from the Lord. They were thus to be cherished and treasured. Life was to be treated as precious and sacred from the moment of conception. So in the Psalms, King David could write, "You formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret. And in your book they all were written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them." For such is the kingdom. In the New Testament, the status of the weak, the infirm, or the defenseless was further elevated. Jesus comforted the weak, embraced the outcast, and healed the sick. As for children, their value was elevated to a level previously unknown in human history. He said this, "Let the little children come to me, and do not forbid them, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." And again, "I say to you, unless you become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me." The teaching of your gods. So, with the entrance of the gospel into the pagan world, there came an inevitable collision of values over the sanctity of human life, the value of women, the treatment of the weak, the care of the sick, and the worth and protection of children, born and unborn. Wherever human sacrifice was performed, the ascendancy of the gospel would bring the practice to an end. In the case of the Roman Empire, it was the Christian faith that caused the practice of infanticide, the killing of little children, to disappear. As to the killing of unborn children, though restrictions had at times been enacted over the issue of parental rights, the act was widely accepted and practiced. But with the coming of the gospel, the practice of killing children, born or unborn, was challenged. The early Christian writer Lactantius wrote this of the pagan world's murder of its children. They either strangle the sons born from themselves, or if they are too pious, they expose them. Can those persons be considered innocent who expose their own offspring as prey for dogs? And the early Christian apologist Marcus Minucius Felix, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, wrote of the link of abortion and the pagan gods. So they commit murder before they bring forth, and these things assuredly come down from the teaching of your gods. The murder of little children came down from the teaching of their gods. If Moloch returned, it was the Christian faith and the biblical valuing of human life that brought protection to young and unborn children, and the definitive end of their large-scale murder. So when the gods were cast out of Western civilization, a spirit of death went with them. The gospel had removed their altars and the blood that had stained them. As the gods departed, lives were saved. Prisoners, slaves, and little children were now spared from being slaughtered as human sacrifices. Countless others were saved from being murdered outright or left out to die in the wilderness as babies, and still others were saved from being killed in their mother's wombs. The gods of death were sent into exile. Among them was Moloch. But if the gods and spirits departed as the civilizations they had once possessed had turned to God, what would then happen if those same civilizations should turn away from God? The gods of death would return. Then Moloch would return. And if Moloch returned, would he not again require blood and human sacrifice? And according to the parable, would not his latter work be worse than his first? And if the ancient destroyer returned, what would happen to the children? Chapter 24. 24. Okay. Keeping track. Trying to just do eight chapters because I know it's long. Chapter 24, The Destroyer Ruins. How did the most ominous god of the Dark Trinity return? The mystery would provide us with a clue, not only as to how he would return, but when. Moloch in the Soviet Union. The end of child and human sacrifice was replayed in every land where the Christian faith prevailed. But if those nations and civilizations should turn from that faith, what would happen? The dark principalities would return, the ancient blood fury would be revived, and the slaughter of the innocents would begin anew. It is no accident that after renouncing Christianity, that which would soon be known as the Soviet Union became the first state to legalize the killing of unborn children. It did so in 1920, soon after coming to power with its legalization of abortion. Years later, out of concerns for population growth, the law would be temporarily revised before being restored again. It is revealing that it was the godless and anti-Christian Soviet Union that was first in the modern world to revive the ancient horror. Moloch in Nazi Germany. In the case of the other demonically anti-Christian power of the 20th century, Nazi Germany, the issue of child sacrifice is more complex. The Third Reich was first concerned with the conquest and proliferation of the master race. Therefore, it was opposed to abortions as much as they affected German or Aryan births. But the Nazis were servants of their gods and ministers of human sacrifice. The blood fury came out in their obsession with slaughtering the sons and daughters of others. Moloch was especially interested in Jewish children. In ancient times, he had killed thousands of them. Now his spirit would cause 1.5 million of them to perish. The third god. But as far as a large-scale reentrance of Moloch into Western civilization in the world, that would require a massive and civilizational turning from God. Again, we are brought back to the pivotal decade of the 1960s. We saw first the entrance and workings of Baal, then of Ishtar. Now must come Moloch, the third of the dark trinity and the principality of death. We would expect, as in ancient times, the spirit of Moloch to set its gaze on little children, the infants that had once been laid on its molten hands. We would expect that it would require their blood and demand their lives, and we would expect its appearance to follow in the wake of the first two gods, and thus in the latter part of that decade, or the early part of the next. And that is exactly what happened. And so it began. In the late 1960s, when a handful of American states opened the door by legalizing the killing of unborn children. Then, on January 22, 1973, the Supreme Court legalized the murder of unborn children. Moloch had come to America. Baal to Moloch. He had help. The gods of the Dark Trinity had worked together. Without Baal laying the groundwork, moving the nation away from its biblical foundation, the idea of taking a human life in the image of God would have been unthinkable. But that foundation had been broken. So too the pagan blurring of distinctions, as in the bull-horned images of Baal, had weakened the line between human and animal. And while it, perhaps, elevated animal life, human life was devalued. Further, the idolatry that came with Baal, in which one could forge one's own idol, create one's own God, and fashion one's own truth and values, meant that there was no more truth or absolutes. Each could do as he or she pleased, and if one could create one's own truth and now could destroy the truth that actually existed, as in human life, the unborn child. Ishtar to Moloch. Baal ushered in Ishtar, and it was Ishtar who ushered in Moloch. Her mythologies were filled with unrestrained sexuality, yet with no apparent thought of or desire for or connection to children. Her indulgences led not to life, but death. Beyond that was the goddess's deeper work. Her sexual revolution had severed sexuality from marriage, husbands from wives, men from fatherhood, and women from motherhood. The most critical bond of life, that of mother and child, had eroded. The natural maternal instinct to save one's child at all costs was weakened and in some cases gone. And so, as in ancient times, little children were now brought by their mothers to the altars of Molech. The gifts of Ishtar. It is believed that in ancient times the cult of Ashtoreth or Ishtar worked in tandem with the cults of Baal and Moloch and the gods of child sacrifice. Children produced by sexual acts in the temples or by Ishtar's prostitutes on the streets provided sacrifices for the gods. So now in modern times, as the sexual revolution bore its fruit, more and more children were conceived outside of marriage and were more likely to be unwanted. Their lives would provide the modern-day sacrifices of Molech. The city on the hill of Molech. America was now offering up its own children as sacrifices. Other nations would be led by its example into taking up the gruesome practice as well. Millions of unborn children around the world would now perish in Molech's shadow. God had warned Israel that if it turned against his ways, if it turned to the gods, it would end up sacrificing its own children, and so it had. And now, too, so had America. And so, too, had the nations of the West, and all these had influenced the rest of the world. It was one more step of repaganization, one more piece of the ancient pagan world returning to the modern. The civilization that had in ancient times cast out the spirits was now repossessed by them, and America, the shining city on the hill, had now become a blood-soaked high place of Molech. Could one of the most widespread and controversial of practices in American culture go back to the rites of the ancient Canaanites? And could the ancient accounts of those rites give us revelation as to what is taking place in our midst? Chapter 25, Children of the Altars. I'm trying to think where we start, 18, 19, 20. Yeah, this is the last one. Children of the Altars. What was it that could cause a mother of ancient times to lift the child of her womb to Molech? The Molech Keys to Success. There's a title. For one thing, she believed that by doing so, she would obtain the god's favor. Her fields would be fruitful, she would be given prosperity, her prayers would be given answers, and her life would be blessed. The Greek writer, Cleotarchus, is credited with this report connecting child sacrifice and gain. Out of reverence for Kronos, the Phoenicians, and especially the Carthaginians, whenever they seek to obtain some great favor, vow one of their children, burning it as a sacrifice to the deity, if they are especially eager to gain success. So in the modern replaying, what could lead a mother to kill the son or daughter of her womb? The most frequently given answer is that if the child lived, it would hamper the mother's life, her time, her energy, her educational or career prospects, her future earning capabilities. The child would be a burden to her aspirations. Thus, by killing the child, the hindrance and burden would be removed, and she would be in a better position to achieve her goals and attain success and prosperity. Female celebrities, feminist leaders, and other women of influence would publicly boast that they were able to find success in their careers because they ended the lives of their unborn children. Thus, the reason given was, in essence, the same as that which led the ancient mothers to lift their children into Molech's arms. By doing so, they believed they were invoking blessing, prosperity, and gain. It's hard to fathom how anyone, ancient or modern, could make such a decision, but the decision remained unchanged. Can a woman forget? In the ancient sacrifice of Molech, the mother or father would bring the child to the altar to be slaughtered. So it is a unique dynamic of abortion that is the mother or father who presents the child to be killed. In the book of Isaiah, the voice of God asks this question: Can a woman forget her nursing child and not have compassion on the son of her womb? Surely they may forget, yet I will not forget you. In the case of Molech and in the case of abortion, the answer is yes. Even mothers may forget. How could something as intrinsic to life as a mother's instinct to protect her child morph into the desire to kill her child? Such things, ancient or modern, are not natural. They are the works of the gods. In the ancient sacrifice, the parent would either kill or else present the child to the priest or officiant, who would then take its life. In the modern sacrifice, the mother, in effect, gives her baby to the officiant, the abortionist, who then takes its life. In the ancient sacrifice, the child could be pierced, cut, crushed, left to die, and or burned. Burning was so common a feature that the scriptures rebuke the Israelites for causing their children to pass through the fire. In the modern sacrifice, the child was likewise pierced, cut, torn apart, left to die, or through use of chemical solutions, burned. Music to kill by. The Greek philosopher Plutarch describes the music that would accompany the sacrifice of children and its purpose. And the whole area before the statue was filled with a loud noise of flutes and drums, so that the cries of wailing should not reach the ears of the people. Oh my gosh. Phew, that one got me. That's terrible. In one sense, the music represented a civilization's celebration of child sacrifice. So too, under the spell of Molech, we have seen not only the return of child sacrifice, but a civilization's celebration of the act. According to Plutarch, the music was especially strategic. The horror of the act was so intense that the public was kept shielded from hearing it by the sound of flutes and drums. So too, in its modern replaying, the horror of putting a baby to death in abortion was so disturbing that its sights, sounds, and details were kept hidden from the public, and the baby's agony could only be expressed in the form of silent screams that no one would hear. The racist God. Diodorus Siculus wrote of the secret transaction concerning the child sacrifices of his day. They had been accustomed to sacrifice to this god the noblest of their sons, but more recently, secretly buying and nurturing children, they had sent these to the sacrifice. In other words, the rich were buying children from those who were not rich in order to sacrifice them in place of their own children. Plutarch writes of similar transactions. And those who had no children would buy little ones from poor people and cut their throats as if they were so many lambs or young birds. Meanwhile, the mother stood by without a tear or moan. So it was poor children who were most adversely affected by the child sacrifice than the rich, more adversely affected. It was poor mothers who were more likely to offer up their children, and far more of poor children than the rich were placed on the altar. Even this was replayed in the modern version of child sacrifice. Abortion was weighted against the children of the poor and of minorities. The child of a poor family, and particularly of a black family, was far more likely to be killed by abortion than the child who was not black or poor. And there were now American cities where more black children were killed through abortion than were actually born. It was one of Molech's many evils that he hated the poor and downcast and was a racist. A culture of cannibals. In the pagan world, it was believed that child sacrifice resulted in benefits not only for the individual who offered it, but to the entire society. It would bring the gods favor and enhance the public good. If a misfortune or calamity came upon the land, it could result in the sacrificing of multitudes of children to appease the god and bring relief to the land. So the Roman philosopher Porphyry writes, the Phoenicians too, in great disasters, whether of wars or droughts or plagues, used to sacrifice one of their dearest, dedicating him to Kronos. So the modern practice of child sacrifice, you know what? I got to stop and say this. So did you guys watch the movie The Incredibles? In The Incredibles, Mr. Incredible is in this cave and he's trying to hide from the bad guy. I can't remember what his name was. And on the wall in the cave is the word Kronos. And Kronos is the key to the computer system. And that I don't know why that dawned on me, but it did. Gotta love Disney. So the modern practice of child sacrifice was likewise hailed for its beneficial effect on the public good. The killing of babies was said to benefit society not only in freeing women to pursue careers, but for holding the promise of breakthroughs in medicine and health. To further enhance this public good and to increase their profit margin, the abortion industry engaged in the sale of baby parts harvested from the murdered children. The spirit of Molech, having mixed children's blood with profit, had created a culture of cannibals. Molech's priests. The Greek philosopher Plato wrote of how the Carthaginian culture viewed child sacrifice. With us, for instance, human sacrifice is not legal, but unholy, whereas the Carthaginians perform it as a thing they account holy and legal. So the Carthaginians not only legalized the practice, they deemed it holy. Even this ancient dynamic was replayed in America and the modern world. The killing of an unborn child was not only legal, but was hallowed as a sacred rite to be praised, celebrated, and venerated as something beautiful and sacrosanct. In ancient Israel, it was the priests of Moloch and Baal who would hallow the murder of children by speaking of it in religious terms. Who then are the modern day priests of Moloch? They are the ones who perform the act and those who sanctify it, the corporations that profit from children's blood, the political leaders and legislators who fight to ensure that Moloch's temples remain overflowing with offerings, and the radical activists and ideologues who speak blessings and praises over the savage act as they lead women to the altars. Blessings and sacraments. The following are some of the actual words spoken by those who sanctify the killing of unborn children. Notice the framing of the act in religious and spiritual terms, as well as the word sacrifice. Our culture needs new rituals as well as laws to restore abortion to its sacred dimension. Abortion is a major blessing and a sacrament in the hands of women. It's not immoral to choose abortion, it's simply another kind of morality, a pagan one. Abortion is a sacrifice. Abortion is a sacred act. There is nothing else needed to be written here. Nothing could in any way add to or take away from the significance of horror of such words. There was a specific place in ancient Israel where the mystery of Moloch was centered and came to its most dramatic conclusion. It would usher in the nation's judgment. Does it have a modern parallel? And does it contain a warning for another civilization and another nation? Let me see when this section ends. We're going to read one more because then we're to the next section. Chapter 26, the Valley of Hinnom. The prophet looked out into the valley where the Lord had sent him. It was the site of the nation's darkest of sins. He had been told to go there to deliver a prophecy of judgment. Because they have forsaken me and made this an alien place, because they have burned incense in it to other gods, whom neither they, their fathers, nor their kings of Judah have known, and have filled this place with the blood of the innocents. Ashes, bones, and blood. It was the valley of Hinnom, the ground that bore witness to the depths to which the nation had descended in its fall from God. It was filled with blood, ashes, and little bones, the evidence of murder. The people had come to that valley to worship their new gods and burn their sons and their daughters in the fire. The prophet was Jeremiah, known as the weeping prophet, for the tears he shed over his nation's fall. It was beyond his fathoming how a nation so blessed, so favored with promise, and so filled with the revelation of God could descend to the horrors in the valley of Hinnom. But the gods had accomplished it. Their aim from the beginning was revealed in the end in the valley of Hinnom. The goal was destruction of the nation's children and of the nation itself. The gods had caused mothers to forget their motherhood and lift up their babies to the molten god that would destroy them. The gods had deafened the nations to the screaming of their little children on the altars in the valley. Millions on the altars. America had its own valley of Hinnom. It was every place in which the nation's unwanted children were put to death. Israel had killed thousands of its sons and daughters. America had killed millions. From the time that their murder was legalized in the early 1970s, America had spilled the blood of approximately 1 million children every year. By the second decade of the 21st century, it had killed over 60 million of them. It was a valley of Hinnom of unfathomable proportions, of endless blood, ashes, and little bones. How could it have happened? How could a nation that once prided itself on being Christian under God and the moral beacon of the world have fallen into such depths of evil? Their blood crying out. It happened just as it had to ancient Israel in a progression of seduction. The spirit of Baal had caused America to believe that departing from God would bring it freedom. The spirit of Ishtar had convinced it that if it abandoned its moral safeguards for instant gratification and sexual abandon, it would find fulfillment, and the spirit of Molech had promised to grant it the blessings of an unhindered life if it would only allow him to take away its children. Baal, Ishtar, and Molech, the dark trinity of Israel's fall, had again seduced a nation and an entire civilization. The promise of their seduction would remain unmet. It would lead instead to a state of brokenness, emptiness, and now death. The paganization of America and Western civilization was now reaping its most bloody of fruits. The once Christian civilization was now taking part in the most pagan of acts, the killing of its own children, their blood crying out to heaven. The Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, America. When Germany turned away from God and the Christian faith, the powers of hell were unleashed. The result was the murder of 6 million Jews and a world war that would see the perishing of tens of millions. When Russia morphed into the Soviet Union and turned away from God and the Christian faith, the result was again the murder of tens of millions of people. When America began turning away from God and the Christian faith, the result was the murder of over 60 million children. The removing of God, and in particular the Christian faith, is a most dangerous thing. The murder of 60 million American children far exceeded anything Moloch had accomplished in ancient times. But the parable said that when the spirits return to the house, they come back over 7 times worse than at the start. And Moloch's death toll in the modern world would be greater still. America's welcoming in of Moloch would ultimately lead other nations to do the same. Taking into account these other sacrifices of Moloch, the killing of unborn children all over the world, the number of those murdered on his altars, the fruit of a world turned away from God, would far exceed 1 billion. A warning from Hinnom. The prophet Jeremiah warned Israel as to what would happen to a nation that had once known God and now lifts up its children as offerings to the gods. The end is destruction. There are few things that so invoke the judgment of God as the killing of little children. The words of the prophet would now warn a civilization that had also once known God and was now offering up its children. The blood of millions now covered America's collective hands. It had departed from God and was now standing in the valley of Hinnom with ashes, bones, and blood, the blood crying out to heaven and likewise in danger of judgment. We are now about to open up the realm of the mystery that will touch upon the highest altars of American and Western civilization. It will now involve the most hallowed of modern sacred cows and idols, thus it will become even more intense and more explosive. We will now illuminate the most controversial of modern-day issues with the light of an ancient mystery. The illumination will involve avatars, modern-day priesthoods, and the playing out of ancient mythology in our midst and in real time. We begin with the opening up of the mystery of the Transformer. And that's where we'll pick up next week on Tuesday at 10:30. So don't get confused. Tuesday at 10:30. I know we started at 10 today. And we'll be done with this in 2 weeks, I think. And so I'm going to start screening books. Like I said, if you have any suggestions for books, please send them to me. Um, we can continue on with, I think this is Johnathan Cahn's most recent, but we could go back and read The Harbinger. The Harbinger, you know what? Actually, I think that's what we'll do. And let me tell you why. I want to read The Harbinger. I'll have to decide whether we're going to read 1 or 1 and 2. But I want to read The Harbinger because The Harbinger talks about 9/11. And when I was on Tracy Bean's show, if you guys followed me from there, let me find David, I think is the fellow's name. Hold on. And you guys might know him. I was really late to the game on wondering if something was hinky with 9/11. I always kind of wondered if maybe the government, had some level of involvement or covering up or trying to, maybe not even necessarily involvement, but hiding where they fell short in protecting us. And so I had done Tracy's show, and hold on, let me find his name. Okay. David Chandler. I don't know if you guys know David Chandler. You can probably look him up on Rumble. I don't know if you'll find him on YouTube. But David Chandler, I want to read this, but I don't want to read anything. Is a Quaker and activist on other issues. 9/11, anti-war. Quakers are all anti-war. An experiencer of two near-death-like events long ago, and I'm getting more and more active on the COVID corruption. I mentioned my 9/11 activism. I'm one of the physicists at the heart of the 9/11 Truth Movement, coordinator of scientists for 9/11 Truth, and on the board of the newly forming International Center for 9/11 Justice. If you look up 9/11 Truth on internet search engines, you will be led into a huge masses of total crap. If you have any interest in this issue, 9/11 wasn't an event, it was a turning point. My website would be a good place to bypass the crap and get into the solid scientific evidence. And his website is 911speakout.org. 911speakout.org. And anyway, he apparently had heard my near-death experience before he saw it on Tracy's show, and then he saw it on Tracy's show, and she had contact information for me. So he reached out, and I asked if he'd be interested in doing an interview, and he is, and his wife is also an activist. That's how he met her. And so I'd like to have both of them on, and so I'll probably have at least him on before we start The Harbinger, because I want to get him on in the next couple of weeks because his summer's pretty busy. But we'll see how it goes. We've got, vacation coming up at the end of June, and, we have to kind of coordinate our schedules. But I really am looking forward to having him on, because when I started researching 9/11, his was the first video I saw. And I mean, this was recent. This was after COVID settled down. And I got onto Rumble, and I think I just searched 9/11, and this David Chandler guy came up, and I thought, oh my goodness, that is a incredible, bit of knowledge that he's got, and his background is really helpful in explaining things. So I think you guys will enjoy him. We'll have him on a Friday night. Lady Be Good says, hello. I find Earth life traumatizing. Earth life is traumatizing, definitely. I don't know how people get through it without having a relationship with God. I just don't. It would be unbearable to me. I couldn't do it, because so much of this is senseless. I think this book is really helping me see that this isn't just out of nowhere, that this is a pattern. This is a history that if we don't correct, we're doomed to relive. And I certainly don't want that. And, my reach isn't huge, but my reach is my reach. And God has really put that on my heart that, don't you worry about numbers. Don't you worry. I've got all that. You just do what I'm guiding you to do. And so that's where I am. I'm very dedicated to praying for you guys, and for all of us to be able to understand what's really going on. Because if you just think it's just depravity out of the blue, if you just think it's a depravity out of the blue, sorry, I always forget to pop up those comments. I'm sorry. then it seems senseless. And how do you fight that? How do you fight something that is mysterious and you have no idea where it's coming from? Well, I feel like this book is giving us the groundwork of this is old. This isn't new. There's nothing new under the sun. The Bible says that. This is these are the same gods that overtook um, the ancient people when they turned from the God. And it always has the same result. The catastrophe is the same every time. And the only thing that turned those societies around was turning to God. So here we are, a society established on God. We left and we came to America because, one of the big reasons was religious freedom. And so we so prized that. And it has just been perverted and bastardized by our government and the media and people and by the gods. And now that I read what happened before, what's happening now is making a lot more sense. And I think as we get to the end of this book, we're going to have some direction on how do you handle that? What do we do? Definitely fervent prayer is warranted, because we don't want the collapse of our society. We don't want 60 million more children to die for convenience. I mean, I'm sick to death of hearing life of the mother, rape and incest. That is very little of the children who died. It's like 1% or less. And they don't even hide it now. It's like, I mean, you have the gal that was in the movie with Hugh Jackman. He's running the circus. Do you guys remember that movie? The pagan infiltrated society. They've been doing it for centuries. Yeah, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. The Greatest Showman. So the gal that plays his wife in The Greatest Showman won some award for her performance. And she got up and she credited her success to the abortion of her child. And I was dumbfounded. I mean, people get up there and they thank their mom and, they thank, their producer, and sometimes they thank God or they curse God. This woman got up and attributed her award to the ability to abort her own child and doing it. And was just as proud as she could be, that she had gotten success by killing her own offspring. And I was like, and there's no outrage. Like, there was no outrage. How depraved are these people? They're all sitting in this audience and they're like, good for you. Good for you. You kill that baby. As long as you, Susan remembers it, as long as you get, that little fake piece of metal award, it's all worth it. You go, girl. And she got roles after that. If that would have happened in my childhood, she would have never worked again. I mean, if you did it, you at least kept it quiet. Like, you didn't brag about it. I've done things in my life that I'm not proud of to achieve certain ends, mostly in my younger years. I would never give up and credit them for the person I am today. I learned from those things, and I learned that I was wrong and turned from that and corrected my path. But that I would never credit that bad act to some accolade that I've received in the here and now. It blows my mind that now it's, you've got people celebrating it. Like I said last week, you've got people in front of the Supreme Court, bragging about how many abortions they've had and that they're using abortion as birth control. And we have gotten so numb to it. If you really want to have the proper outrage about this and the proper sadness over just how profound this is, watch The Silent Scream. My friend Zach Redpill recommended it to me, and you guys, I'm a nurse. I've seen a lot. I couldn't get through it. I think I got like 10 minutes to the end, 8 minutes to the end or something, and I physically had to turn it off. I could not do it. And I don't know what I thought. I didn't think about it. I did not realize it was as brutal as it is, especially, once you're past that first trimester, but even before. um, I mean, it's terrible. And the fact that there aren't thousands and thousands of people standing out in front of abortion centers or across the street from them, however far away you have to stand, quietly protesting this is shocking to me. Um, of course, there's not that big of an opportunity now since I think most of ours in Kentucky aren't open right now. Um, but the fact that this was just done, and I didn't realize until probably this year or maybe last year that we were over 60 million. 60 million. Our country is what, 330 million? That's that's mind-blowing. And so I'm always like, I don't want to hear anybody who thinks that's okay complain about the state of the world. I'm like, well, I'm sorry. We probably had a really good president in there somewhere. We probably had the cure to cancer. We probably had um, the cure to poverty and hunger, and and our punishment for doing that is that we don't get those answers. We don't we've got to do what we need to do as a society to to reinvigorate the family, to to welcome fathers and men back into the fold and remind them that they are not only necessary, they're essential. And that is past the act of conception. You are essential to that child. We have got to make good decisions about who we choose to have children with so that we can do all we can so that it doesn't end in a divorce, because a child needs both parents. There is a balance. There's a yin and a yang, and the child needs both. And the proof of that is all around us. Look at all of the violence and the atrocities that happen. I mean, when children know that it's okay to end pregnancies via killing a child, do you think that helps them to grow up with the sense of life being sacred and important and meaningful? I don't think it does. And we've only ourselves to blame for that. Lorraine says, thank you so much for putting your reading of Johnathan's book online. I've been deeply moved. I am so glad that it is speaking to you. It definitely is me. I watched him on something last night, and so I started reading Jeremiah this morning. And boy, if you just want a parallel of where we are, Jeremiah is a great place to start reading. I was just heartbroken over it, and I was praying over us and asking God to help us to bring it, to make it hurt a little, bring it to our hearts like it is to God, you know, bring us the pain of a lost 60 million children. Give us just a glimpse of what that pain is like for God so that we can feel it in our hearts and we can be incensed by it. And we can act in love to do whatever we can to support women so that they can have these children. And for all the people that are like, oh, you say that, but you've not adopted an unwanted child. And I'm like, who adopts the most children? Christians. I mean, that's just a fact. Who donates the most to charities? Christians. It's just true. And, and I feel like I did a large part in my life by mothering children whose mothers weren't mothering them, and trying to be there for them and give them some guidance and help them walk a straight path. And I ran an after school program so that kids wouldn't go home alone. I've always been very invested in, the needs of the community. As a nurse, you can't help but be invested, and I've taken care of moms that have had a fetal demise, or they don't go to the mother baby unit after. They would come up to our women's floor, and or women who were giving their babies up for adoption. I mean, you want to talk about an act of heroism. I have seen what these women have gone through in the moments and hours after they have a child that they know that they're not going to keep because they can't do it. There's no way they could financially do it. And I just have never had more respect for human beings than those that are like, I can't do this. This is a temporary condition. It's a It's a self-terminating condition. At 9 months, it's going to end. Either way, um, in 9 months, it's going to end, and you don't have to keep that baby, and then you're no longer pregnant, and you can go on with your life. You can't tell me that that few months is going to kill your acting career. That few months that you took to go ahead and finish out what you started, give life to that child, and then go on about your business, and you don't ever have to look back. And that's tragic in and of itself, but at least it's not murder. But I think part of it is this is an unseen thing, hiding under your heart in your womb. You don't see it. And if you do it quick enough, nobody will know about it. And because the flutes and the drums play over the sounds of the screams, they assume there's no screaming. And I'm like, you cannot rip a 6-month, 5-month, 4-month child apart without pain. It just can't be done. The only reason they can't scream is because they can't inhale air. But if you watch that movie, The Silent Scream, you will see that baby scream. It's awful. And I feel like if you're going to do that, you should be fully informed. You should see what that is from your child's end, because you are the only voice they have. So at least woman up and watch that movie and then make your decision. Then say, okay, I know everything I need to know. And then you decide. And I would encourage you to choose life. If there's any way that anybody that's going through this or trying to make this decision, and it's very personal to me, having been raped in college and, having conceived my first child when I was just engaged, and it the topic came up, not by me, but others, and, people encouraging me not to have my son. And I just was astounded by it. I'm like, because of convenience? What? I don't understand how this would be okay. Like, I behaved badly. I took the natural order of things and turned it on its head, and there is a consequence that results. There's a biochemical process that took place, and now I'm a mother, and I will walk that out. And I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I did. I don't think it would have improved my life a minute, and I had to raise 3 kids by myself. I don't think it would have changed my life a bit to only have had to raise 2. I don't. Once you got more kids than you've got hands, it's all a crapshoot anyway. I mean, you're overrun, and they have brought so much joy to my life and added so much value to this world. I just cannot imagine that the people that knew and loved me, suggested it. And it's because it's unseen. It's just this quiet little thing. It's just a clump of cells. Well, let me tell you something. Technically, that's all you are. You're just a clump of arranged cells. You're taller, you're bigger, you're more developed, but you're nothing more than a clump of cells and a spirit. And that baby has a spirit. And that's what they don't want to talk about. That's what they don't want to talk about. They don't want to discuss the fact that we have a spirit. And what's so funny is some people have the spirit they have this heart that is so hardened, and their eyes do not see, their ears do not hear, and you can't tell it to them. And I'm like, well, how do you explain love? There's no biochemical thing that I could show you that's true for every person that happens when a person is feeling love. I'm sure there is a biochemical thing. We know some of it, but we don't know all of it. We don't know what's happening in the brain. I was telling Tracy the other day, I said, I can prove that there is an energy to us. When you're driving down the road and you feel somebody staring at you, how often do you look at the wrong car first? Never. I always look straight at the person who's staring at me. The energy of that person's focus, just their focus on me, is enough to get my attention and make me turn my head to see who's looking at me. We have these things called mirror neurons. I don't know if you know about mirror neurons. And my theory with autism is there is some dysfunction with mirror neurons because they have a very hard time interpreting other people's feelings and misreading social cues. Mirror neurons are neurons in your brain. Like when I get weepy and emotional about something, you guys get weepy and emotional. I'm not crying, you're crying. That's mirror neurons. somebody, or when I start cracking up, when you guys get me, Friday night was crazy. When you guys get me all torn up on a Friday night and I can't speak because every one of you's laughing too. You can't help it. Mirror neurons. God gave us mirror neurons because without them, it is very difficult to have compassion and empathy because you cannot see the reflection of your own feelings in another person. And I just feel like we're putting all these kids on antidepressants and we're seeing all this violence, terrible violence come out of it, or self-harm. Well, no kidding. You're dumbing down, you're numbing those mirror neurons, and they're less able to connect with each other. Depression is a real issue, and it absolutely needs to be treated. I would be very cautious about who you go to, because there are some people who do therapy who do not have your best interest in mind. They have a very pagan worldview, and you develop this relationship of trust with them, and it is very easy to lead you down the wrong path. So if you're going to marriage counseling, make sure you're going to marriage counseling with somebody who believes that marriage is sacred. Because otherwise, you're going to get advice to just end it at some point. You've got to friend up in these things. You've got to, if you're struggling with feeling connection with your spouse, make sure you have friends who have strong connection with their spouse, because they will model that for you, and you'll start to see how to do it, and your spouse will see how to do it, and you'll learn to reconnect. We're not meant to walk this walk alone, and that's where we get in trouble. When I had my shoulder surgery, I'm normally a person, let's go back. When I had COVID, I am normally a person who would never ask for help. It just was a shameful thing to me. I was very proud. And when I got sick with COVID, I realized I was trying to help other people. I was putting my story out there and sharing it every day that I was sick, so people could see what they might go through and we could learn together how we could help. And I did not realize how much help they were to me, or how much help they would be. We needed, suddenly we had this opportunity to get like injectable vitamin C at home, and this other injectable peptide, which is very good for the immune system. And it was going to cost, I want to say like $800 or something. I can't remember exactly how much it was, and we just couldn't afford it. So I'm like, okay, well, we'll just keep trudging this path. But I had done the research on these things and was talking to people about it. And I'm like, the thing is, it's expensive. We have a doctor here that can get it for us, but the cost is just insane. So I didn't even consider it. And then I thought, well, what if I asked them to help out? And it just made me just feel awful inside. And I'm like, okay, this is pride. Nobody here wants you to die. You don't want to die. They're willing to help. Who are you to turn away? You've blessed them through the way you've lived intentionally. Who are you to deny them the opportunity to bless you back? And that's why we let people help us. And I mean, we put up the little thing where they could donate, and Don fixed me lunch. I was eating lunch, got done eating lunch, opened the computer, and we had already doubled what we'd asked for. And I got online and I'm like, stop, don't send any more money. It's way more than we need. And I was trying to figure out how to send it back to people. And they were like, keep it. You have brought so much to this. You've more than earned this money. You've done the work. And in my heart, I couldn't do it. I was like, I can't keep that money. So I started thinking about where could it do the most good. And so we paid for our out-of-pocket medical that we had. I think in the end, there was like $700 or $800 left. And we donated it to a church that does a backpack program for preschoolers. And it's Oasis Church here in Winchester, Kentucky. And they pack up their backpacks with enough food to get them through the weekend. And because of the schools being closed and everything, the parents who were getting aid it wasn't going as far because their kids were home all day, and they couldn't work, and so then they weren't getting money for extra groceries from work. It was just a really bad situation. So they pitched in to make sure those kids got fed. And so my entire group that started following me in 2020 on Facebook, we helped feed those kids. So they saved my life and they helped feed those kids. I mean, that's a win-win. So I would encourage you, when you need help or you need prayer, ask for it. You have not because you don't ask. There's nothing shameful about needing help. That's how it's supposed to be. We used to live in much smaller communities. We stayed closer to our families, and we had this kind of built-in support system, and our society is very fragmented now. I feel like individualism has been pushed to a grotesque level. And I mean, even little kids are scared to ask for help. That should not be a thing. And we have to start encouraging it, and instead of, waiting for somebody to ask you for help, offer it. How can I help you? Can I pray for you? What is it you need? People reach out to me all the time and they're like, hey, I've got this problem or that problem. And I try to help them. Not always successful, but I always try. See you Friday. Goodbye, sweetheart. All right, guys, I'm going to pray us out because it's almost noon and I've got to eat. I got steroids in my belly and they're setting me on fire. So don't forget, real quick, Tuesday at 10:30, we're going back to our regular schedule, okay? And I'm working on the interview with David, and that'll be a Friday night thing. But Tuesday at 10:30, we'll be back to where we're supposed to be. All right, here we go, guys. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, and thank you for every person who is here and every person who will hear this video on the replay. I pray that you light in them a passion to do what is right and what is good and to turn to you. Father, I pray that you would give us just a sense of what the loss of 60 million children has done to you. Just a taste of it. I know if we had to feel the fullness of it, it would kill us. But help break our hearts for these mothers and these children that are in these terrible circumstances, and help us look for ways that we can help, whether it's donating to crisis pregnancy centers or just directly helping those moms. Help us and help us to teach them that they are loved and created on purpose for a purpose. And so is that child. You're knitting that child together in their womb, not to be a curse to them, but to be a blessing. That child is a blessing to them. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. You tell us that we are made more. We are taken outside of our own selfishness and forced to act in a selfless way when we have children, Father. And when we get married, we're forced to push down the things that we want and behave in a selfless way to our spouse, and help us to model that to our children. If we've gotten into this situation where we're kind of biting at each other or just very disconnected, Father, draw us back to each other. Give us a new passion for our spouse. Help us see our spouse the way you see him, and help him see us the way that you see us. Just give us this, wake up our mirror neurons, Father, and birth in us an empathy and a compassion that is overwhelming, Father. Make us the light to this world, and please forgive us for turning to false gods. We have all done it. And one way or another, we've turned to something that isn't you for what only you can give, and we have come back emptier for it. Please forgive us. Father, we'd ask that you would forgive us and that you would help us turn from the ways that we've gone that have helped add to everything that's going wrong in the world. Forgive us, help us turn from it, bring us back to you. Give us a passion for God. Remind us that when we walk with you, we walk in freedom. It's not a life of limitation. It is a life of freedom. You open doors. You make our world bigger by walking with you. You show us who we are through you, who you see us as, not this little person who has all these limitations and restrictions and isn't good enough or smart enough. That's not who you see. That's not who you made. We are sons and daughters of the Most High God. Father, help us know that and act like it. Father, keep us from being proud, and keep us from feeling like we're better than other people. All those people that are lost, Father, they have given themselves over to the gods. Help us be an example for how they might recover from that. Because at some point, they're going to be on the floor. They're going to hit their bottom. And there's got to be somebody shining the light so they'll know where to go from there, or they'll be hopeless and they'll just kill themselves. And we don't want that. We want reformed lives, because reformed lives are an incredible testimony to the love of God. We want the guy that's dressed like the devil on the awards show. We want him to see the path that he's walking. We want him to see how it's destroying him. And we want him to hand his life over to you and say, make me holy. Make me holy, Lord. Take this demonic garbage away from me. Make me a man who can be light to the world. I have a stage. Let me shine on that stage for God. Father, we pray for all of these people who are in the public light, who are just nothing but destruction. Father, use them as a great testimony to the love of God. Father, we just thank you for all these things. I pray for everybody who donated this week. Thank you so much. Father, I pray that you would return that to them tenfold, and that any need that is in their lives, that because of their generosity to me, that you would help meet that need. And I just thank you so much for this time together with everyone. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, guys. I love you whole big bunches. My email is in the description, and my if you want to donate and support the show, that's also in the description, and greatly appreciated. Greatly appreciated. You just have no idea. I mean, I was able to cover my StreamYard bill and my Rumble bill and the added cost of upgrading our internet just with your donations already this month. It's just meant the world to me. I wish I could tell you how much, make you see how much it means to me. I mean, and I, have one person send me $5, and I was like, that is so awesome. I just am so impressed by the people who have so little who still give. It blows me over. For out of her little she gave. The Bible talks about that. Sure, this rich man gave, and he did it publicly, but look at this poor woman, the poor widow. Out of the little she had, she gave. And that is real commitment. And I'm thankful to everybody who can give more as well. That's wonderful. And it really does help the show, and it helps spread this ministry to other people. What is that name? Farrell? Hi, Penny. I've been a lurker since September. Well, my goodness, love. I found you through your NDE story on the other side of NDE YouTube. It hit me different, and I believe it was by divine intervention, and I came across it that night. And I've watched almost all of the full-length interviews now. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your story. Your prayer really touched me just now. I also wanted to say thank you. Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. I've got one coming out. I just did an interview with a gal. Was it last week? And I'll keep you guys posted when that one's going to come out on her channel. I can't remember it off the top of my head. And then I've got one that I need to reschedule. And so that'll be coming out, probably in the next month or so too. So I'll keep you guys up on when they're going up. I'm hoping I get to do some talks where the person actually wants to ask questions and doesn't just want to hear my story over again. I'm going to probably start turning down talks to just tell my story again. Like, I'm okay with giving a brief sum up, but what I would prefer to do would be to talk about the after effects of a near-death experience and how it's changed me, and the vision that it's given me, and how it's changed my walk, and how it's opened me up to relationship. The near-death experience is great, but the after effects, that's how you know if you're looking at a real near-death experience or not. And yes, of course, there are people who lie about it. People lie about everything that there is to talk about. That doesn't mean everybody's a liar. I'm just telling you that does happen. And the way that you can tell is by the fruit of that person's life. So I feel really restricted in only telling my near-death experience. I want to talk about the fruit of that in my life. So pray that those opportunities would come available, and that people would be open to furthering that discussion and not just focusing it on the experience itself, because that takes up the whole time, and then there's not much time to talk about anything else. So anyway, that's all I've got for you. We will see you guys Friday night at 8:30. And I've got a few things. There's been some interesting news this week, so we'll cover that stuff, and I'm going to try to balance it so that it's not all politics, and that it's, or current events, that there's some lighter stuff in there. I'm going to try to balance it a little bit more. I've been trying to balance it, but we'll do it more, so that I always try to have everybody going away feeling good. Feeling like there's something you can do, and not feeling beat down. So watch for that Friday night at 8:30. And if I don't see you then, I'll see you Tuesday morning at book club at 10:30 Eastern. Love you guys, whole big bunches. Nurse Penny out.